I moved into the building because it was all I could afford. A decaying 6-story apartment block built in the late 60s, slumped between 2 abandoned shops like it was trying to hide from the rest of the street. The bricks were cracked, the windows fogged from the inside, and the hallways smelled faintly of old pipes and bleach, like someone was always trying to scrub away something you weren't supposed to see. But rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap. I signed the lease anyway. I didn't have a choice. My unit was 4A, and right next to mine was 4B. The first time I walked up the stairs with my boxes, I saw something taped crookedly on the door of 4B. Just a torn piece of paper stuck there with old yellow tape. 4 words, written in jagged, almost desperate handwriting. I stopped mid-step staring at it. I thought it was some kind of joke, or maybe a warning about a dangerous neighbor. I even laughed out loud, until I realized that the peephole on 4B was dark. I swear I felt someone standing on the other side of the door, watching me, breathing in slow, heavy intervals. The hallway grew colder the longer I stood there. When I finally turned to enter my apartment, I heard the soft click of a door lock sliding. Not opening, but shifting. Like someone inside 4B was adjusting their lock quietly, listening to me. The nights were worse. The building settled loudly, groaning, creaking, popping, but beneath all that, beneath the natural noises, I kept hearing something else. A dragging sound. Heavy. Slow. Like furniture being pulled across the floor, or something being dragged by its ankles. Around 1 or 2 a.m., it always started in 4B. A dull scrape across the floor. A pause. Another scrape. Then a long, uneven thud, like something collapsing. Some nights I heard footsteps pacing back and forth, pacing for hours. But the footsteps never sounded quite right. Too heavy, too slow, as if each step was being forced. I asked the landlord about the tenant next door. He didn't answer my question. He only sighed, rubbed his face, and muttered, "You're safer if you keep to yourself." And then he walked away. On my 7th night, everything escalated. Around 2:13 a.m., I woke up to a sharp tapping. Not loud, just deliberate. 3 taps. A long silence. 3 more. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the wall I shared with 4B, right behind the head of my bed. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and listened. The tapping turned into knocking. Soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Then it stopped. And then I heard my name. Not screamed. Not whispered. Just spoken clearly, softly, as if someone stood inches away from the other side of the wall and said it directly into the plaster. "Come to the door." I froze. The voice didn't sound angry or threatening. It sounded lonely. Against every instinct I had, I got out of bed, walked to my apartment door, and looked through the peephole. There, in the flickering hallway light, stood a man. Very tall. Very still. Facing my door. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't blinking. Just standing there with his head tilted to the left at an impossible angle, as though his neck had given up a long time ago. I backed away, but then knock, knock, knock. He knocked exactly 3 times. Pause. 3 more. The same exact rhythm as the tapping on my wall. I hid behind the kitchen counter and waited. I don't know how long he stood there, but eventually, the knocking stopped. When I finally gathered the courage to check again, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I spoke to one of the older residents, a quiet woman who always kept her door chained. When I mentioned the tenant in 4B, she froze, went pale, and shook her head slowly. "There is no tenant," she whispered. "Not anymore." I asked what she meant. She hesitated, looked behind her as if expecting someone to be listening, and leaned closer. "He died in that apartment 6 months ago. They found him sitting upright in a chair, facing the door, like he'd been waiting for someone to come home. But the doctor said he'd been dead for days. I felt sick to my stomach. I told her I saw someone in the hallway last night. Someone knocking on my door, her eyes filled with tears. That wasn't the hallway, she whispered. That was him trying to leave the apartment again. I moved out 2 days later. I didn't even finish packing. I just shoved clothes into trash bags and left. But on my final walk down the hallway, I felt compelled to look at 4B's door one last time. The old note, the one that warned me, was gone. In its place was a fresh piece of paper, taped neatly to the door, the ink still drying. Same shaky handwriting. This one didn't warn me. It thanked me. Thank you for keeping him company. I didn't look back, not even once. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The apartment above mine, 5C, had been empty for as long as I lived there. The landlord told me it needed maintenance, but everyone in the building seemed to avoid talking about it. They would go quiet the moment the subject came up, like mentioning the unit out loud might stir something inside it. For the first few weeks living there, I didn't hear anything from upstairs. No footsteps, no water running, no creaking floorboards, nothing. It was unnaturally quiet, almost peaceful. Then one night around 1:30 a.m. I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps directly above my bedroom. I sat up in bed confused. The landlord told me no one lived in 5C, but someone was walking around up there with the weight and pace of a grown adult. The footsteps kept going, pacing from one corner of the apartment to the other. Then a loud thud. Then the dragging sound of something being pulled across the floor. It went on for hours. The next morning I called the landlord. She insisted, again, that the apartment above me was empty. Vacant. Locked. I didn't believe her, so that afternoon I went upstairs myself. The door to 5C was sealed shut with a thick metal plate screwed across the frame. Older than the building's other hardware. Dusty. Like it hadn't been opened in years. But the strangest thing of all was the floor in front of it. The dust was disturbed. Footprints. Bare footprints. Small, like a child's. Except the footsteps I heard last night belonged to someone heavy. Someone dragging something. I went back downstairs feeling uneasy. That night, around the same time, the footsteps returned. This time they were faster, heavier, almost frantic. Back and forth in the same tight pattern. Sometimes stopping right above my head as if whoever or whatever was up there knew exactly where I was. Then I heard something new. A voice. Not loud, not clear. Just a series of muffled whispers, like someone talking behind a door or whispering into a pillow. I froze, listening. The whispers stopped suddenly, and then something slammed against the floor above me so hard that dust fell from my ceiling. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I asked one of the older tenants if she'd ever heard anything from 5C. She looked at me with fear, real fear, and said, "Honey, nobody lives up there. Nobody has lived up there since the accident." I asked her what accident. She shook her head and walked away, wiping her eyes. Nobody would tell me the full story. A week later, everything escalated. It was 2:11 a.m. I woke up to someone running back and forth directly above my bed. Full sprint. Fast enough to shake the light fixtures. Then, silence. Complete silence. Until something pressed down on my ceiling above me. A long, slow pressure. Like two hands sliding across the floorboards. Right above my face. I held my breath. The pressure moved, following the outline of my bed. Then I heard breathing. Not my breathing. Not an animal. Breathing from inside the ceiling. Deep, slow, wet sounding. I bolted out of bed, heart pounding, and ran into the hallway. The floor in front of my apartment door creaked. From above. Like someone was kneeling directly over me. I didn't go back inside that night. The next morning, I confronted the landlord in the lobby. I demanded to see the inside of 5C. She refused. I insisted. She refused again. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "You don't want to open that door, not anymore." I left the building the next week, but I visited one last time to pick up some mail. While walking down the hallway past 5C, I noticed that the metal plate sealing the door had been torn loose on one side, like something inside had been pushing out. A piece of paper was sticking out from the gap. I tugged it free with trembling hands. On the paper were tiny scratches, hundreds of them, like fingernails dragging over and over again in the same spot. And beneath the scratches, a single word written in black marker. "Below!" That word still keeps me awake at night, because I always wondered, when I heard those footsteps pacing above me, was I really hearing someone in 5C, or was something crawling? In the space between my ceiling and their floor, something that was never upstairs, but right above me the whole time. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. If you live in an apartment building, you know the laundry room always has a strange feeling to it. Too quiet, too empty, too far away from the rest of the world. In my building, the laundry room was in the basement, down a long, slanted hallway where the lights buzzed like they were struggling to stay alive. The floor tiles were cracked, the air always felt damp, and the washing machine sounded like they were breathing. But I worked late shifts, so I usually went down around midnight. And for the first month, I never saw another soul. One night, everything changed. It was almost 12:45 a.m. when I carried my laundry basket down the hallway. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. There was someone sitting in one of the plastic chairs by the vending machine. A woman. She was wearing a long gray dress, old-fashioned, almost like something from the 1950s. Her hair was long and black, hanging over her face. She sat completely still, hands folded neatly on her lap. I assumed she was a neighbor I hadn't met yet, so I nodded politely. She didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even look up, just sat there like a mannequin someone had forgotten to remove. I felt uneasy, but I started loading my laundry. The machines clanked and hummed loudly in the quiet room. After a few minutes, I glanced at her again. She was still sitting exactly the same way, but she wasn't facing the vending machine anymore. Her chair had shifted a few inches. Now she was angled slightly toward me. I blinked, confused. I hadn't heard her move. Not even a rustle of clothing. Nothing. I shook it off and kept working. When I turned around again, the chair was now fully turned toward me. The woman was sitting upright, body rigid, hair still covering her face. Her hands were in her lap, but her fingers were curled tightly like she was gripping something invisible. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Even the machines sounded like they were holding their breath. I stared at her, trying to see her face under the hair. Then I noticed something that chilled me. She wasn't breathing. No rise. No fall. Her chest didn't move at all. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Are you okay?" The woman didn't move. I stepped closer very slowly, and that's when I heard it. A faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Her fingers were twitching one at a time, tapping against the fabric of her dress. Faster, faster. Like she was sending a message or counting something. I backed away immediately. Just then, the light above us flickered violently. When it steadied, she was gone. The chair was empty, but the door hadn't opened. I would have heard the metal latch. I would have heard footsteps. There was no way she left. The laundry room was silent again. I grabbed my clothes, still dripping wet, and sprinted to my apartment. For the next week, I refused to go back downstairs, but eventually I ran out of clean clothes. So one evening around 8 p.m., earlier when other people might be around, I forced myself to go back. The moment I stepped into the laundry room, I noticed something off. One of the plastic chairs was facing the corner. Not the vending machine. Not the machines. The corner. The same chair she sat in. I walked past it with my eyes down. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the floor behind the chair, half hidden under the legs, was a hair tie. A black one. The same color, the same type, as the hair that covered her face. It looked old, stretched, like it had been there a long time. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue. 15 minutes passed. Everything was normal. Then, the lights flickered again. Just for a moment, and in that split second of darkness I heard a soft whisper. "Don't turn around." The voice was right behind me. Close to my ear. Female. I froze. My body felt like it was filling with ice. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. When the lights came back, the room was empty. But I could feel it. Someone was still there, standing just behind me, watching. I slammed the washer door shut and ran out so fast I almost tripped on the stairs. I told my neighbor about it the next day, even though it sounded insane. He didn't laugh. He just nodded, slowly. Then he told me the story I wish I never heard. Years ago, a woman used to live on the second floor. Quiet, polite, always wore gray dresses. She did her laundry late at night. One night, she never came back upstairs. They found her in the basement laundry room the next morning, sitting in that same plastic chair facing the corner. Her hair covering her face, her fingers tapping against her dress. They said she had died hours before anyone found her. No signs of struggle, no injuries, just gone. And the part that still keeps me awake? My neighbor told me she was found sitting so still that the first two building employees thought she was alive, because her body hadn't slumped or stiffened yet. One more thing, he added quietly. Ever since then, people say she gets up sometimes, finishes her last load of laundry. I moved out 2 months later, but sometimes when I'm doing laundry at my new place, I swear I can hear that same faint tapping behind me. Like someone counting, waiting for me to turn around. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. He always hated the storage room at the end of the hallway. Everyone did. It wasn't on the original floor plans, the door didn't match the rest, and no one seemed to know who had the key, except the building owner, who never talked about it. But the new apartment manager, Jordan, wasn't the type to be afraid of a door. He'd worked night shifts in worse places. He kept that thought close whenever he walked past it, because sometimes he swore the metal knob twitched, like someone was turning it from inside. One night around 2 a.m., a tenant on the 3rd floor called in a noise complaint, said something was scratching the pipes. Jordan sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and headed upstairs. The building was unusually cold. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that sinks into your ribs and stays there, like a hand pressing against your spine. When he reached the 3rd floor hallway, the scratching sound was faint but unmistakable. A slow drag, then 3 quick taps. Metal on metal. He followed it. Past the fire exit, past the laundry room, right to the storage room door. Of course. The noise stopped the moment he stepped up to it. Jordan knocked. Nothing. He pressed his ear against the door and heard something shift inside. Something breathing. Every instinct told him to walk away, but then the knob turned. Not fully, just enough to click, like an invitation. Jordan swallowed hard. "I'm the building manager," he said, trying to sound calm. "Who's in there?" Silence. Then the softest whisper. Not a word. Just the sound of breath crossing the crack of the door. He backed up a step. The lights overhead flickered once, twice. Then everything went black. His flashlight snapped on instinctively, casting a pale cone of light down the hallway. The beam stopped on the storage room door, now slightly open. Just a sliver, just enough to see darkness. Not the normal kind, the kind that swallows the light before it reaches the walls. Jordan's heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Hey!" he shouted, trying to force strength into his voice. "This isn't funny." Something moved inside the dark, slow, deliberate, coming toward the opening. He froze. A hand slipped out first. Thin, grayish, fingers too long, joints bending wrong, dragging across the wall as if it needed guidance. Then another hand, and slowly, something stepped forward. It wasn't shaped like a person, not exactly. More like the outline of someone who used to be a person. Collapsed shoulders, head tilted, movements disturbingly smooth, like it didn't quite understand how bodies worked. But the worst part, the part that made Jordan's stomach turn, it didn't have a face, just smooth skin where features should have been. A featureless head turning toward him, stretching as if trying to find him. Jordan stepped back. The thing stepped out, its limbs stiff and trembling. Then, as if detecting his breath, it jerked its head toward him sharply, like a predator locking in. And it started walking. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Jordan ran. He sprinted down the hallway, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. Behind him, he heard it. Not footsteps. Just the scraping of its hands along the wall as it followed. He reached the stairwell, slammed the door, and bolted down 2 floors. He didn't stop until he reached the lobby, chest burning, vision blurred. He called the building owner immediately. The man answered on the second ring as if he'd been awake. "You opened that door, didn't you?" Jordan could barely breathe. Something came out. "What the hell is it?" A long silence. Then the owner whispered, "It used to be the original caretaker, before the renovation. He stayed in that room, wouldn't leave, said the building spoke to him." Jordan's skin crawled. "He died in there," the owner continued, "but I don't think he ever left. The room keeps him quiet, if it stays locked." Jordan whispered shakily, "What do we do now?" The owner exhaled slowly, almost resigned. "Don't turn around." Jordan froze. He hadn't mentioned where he was standing. "How do you—" "You're breathing loud," the owner said quietly, "and I can hear him behind you." Jordan felt warm air brush the back of his neck. Not human. Too close, too curious. He never finished the call. When the morning shift arrived, the lobby was empty. His phone was still on the counter, screen cracked. The stairwell door upstairs was wide open. And the storage room door? Closed. Locked. As if it had never been touched. But later that week, tenants started complaining again, saying the new manager walks the hallway at night, dragging his fingers along the walls. Just like the old caretaker did. Just like the thing that came before him. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. There are certain apartments where the silence feels heavy, as if something else is listening. Morgan didn't believe in any of that. She had rented apartment 402 because it was cheap, recently renovated, and, according to the landlord, rarely occupied. That last part didn't bother her. She liked quiet buildings. She was a night owl, worked from home, kept to herself. But on her very first night, she realized the building wasn't empty. At least it didn't sound that way. Around 1:40 a.m., she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging footsteps. They moved from one end of the hall to the other, then stopped directly outside her door. She froze. There was no peephole on the door, so she couldn't see who it was. But she felt the weight of someone, or something, standing there. A minute passed, then 2, then 3. Finally, the footsteps moved again, slowly fading toward the far end of the hallway. And then, silence. The next morning, she politely asked her neighbor across the hall about it, an older woman named Ms. Delaney who always seemed tired, as if she hadn't slept in years. Ms. Delaney stared at her for a long moment before answering. "You heard them too, then?" Morgan frowned. "Them?" Ms. Delaney shook her head. "Never mind, don't open your door after midnight, that's all. No explanation, no details, just that simple warning." Morgan tried to brush it off, but that night the footsteps returned. This time they started much earlier, around 11:50 p.m., and they sounded heavier, as if the person was walking with a limp. Then came a knock. 3 slow taps. She didn't move, didn't breathe. A whisper followed, right outside her door, almost touching it. "Let me in, please." The voice sounded wrong, as if it were being pushed through a throat that didn't want to speak. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. The whisper came again, this time softer, but layered, as though more than one voice was speaking. "Please, let me in." She stayed awake until dawn, and when she opened the door in the morning, nothing was there. Except something caught her eye. On the floor right at her threshold was a wet footprint, bare, human, and facing inward. That meant someone had been standing with one foot inside her doorway, except the door had been locked the entire night. By the 4th night, Morgan had stopped pretending things were normal. She shoved a towel under the door, locked every window, and left the hallway light on. But the hallway lights began flickering randomly, not fast, slowly, as if someone were standing under them, moving back and forth. Shadows stretched and shifted under her doorframe, even though there were no windows or lights outside. At 2:03 a.m., her bedroom doorknob turned. She hadn't locked it. She sat up, every muscle tensed. The door creaked open just an inch, just enough for her to see the hallway outside, completely dark. And then the footsteps began inside her apartment. She didn't see anything at first, just a shadow on the wall that didn't match her own. Something tall, thin, crooked, like its torso bent in too many places. It passed her open bedroom door without stopping, heading toward the living room. And then, it stopped. She heard breathing, a deep, wet, dragging inhale, then a slow exhale that sounded almost like a growl. "Where are you?" She didn't think. She bolted forward and slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it, then pushing her dresser in front of it. The footsteps immediately rushed toward her, fast, frantic, scraping across the floor. Something slammed into the door with such force that dust fell from the ceiling. "Morgan!" She had never told anyone her name. She squeezed into her closet, dialing emergency services with trembling hands. The operator kept asking her to speak, but she could barely breathe. The pounding on the door grew louder, angrier, until the wood began to crack. Then suddenly, silence. When police arrived 20 minutes later, her apartment was empty. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. The officers searched every unit on the floor but found nothing. Before they left, one of them quietly pulled her aside. "This building, we've had calls before, a lot of them. People seeing things in the halls, hearing voices. Room 402 is the worst of them." She stared at him. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because no one has lived in that apartment longer than a week. Not since the first tenant disappeared. They found blood under the door and footprints leading inside, but no one ever found a body." Morgan moved out that same morning, but the neighbors still hear footsteps in the hallway, dragging footsteps, stopping outside her old apartment. And sometimes late at night, a voice still whispers, "Please, let me in." If you made it this far, Thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to NightFear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.